Hello and welcome to the Summer Rise. I'm Roshan Mohammed Salih. Israel's parliament has passed a controversial law legalizing almost 4,000 settler homes built on privately owned Palestinian land in the occupied West Bank. The so-called regularization bill was passed by 60 votes to 52 in the Knesset. It comes amid an escalation in settlement activity since the inauguration of Donald Trump as US president. More than 600,000 Jews live in about 140 illegal settlements built since Israel's 1967 occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem Al-Quds, land the Palestinians claim for a future state. Palestinian officials said the law was an attempt to legalize land theft, and President Mahmoud Abbas described it as an aggression against the Palestinian people that he will be opposing in international organizations. Here's Monica Ndil with reaction from the West Bank.
Jewish settlement expansion in the occupied lands has surged ever since the election of Donald Trump in the U.S. presidential election. And in the short period since his inauguration, Israel has approved over 6,000 new settler units in the illegal Jewish settlements. Here in northeast Ramallah, the Beit El settlement with a population of over 7,000 residents was largely built on private Palestinian lands located adjacent to Al Jalazon refugee camp. Residents from the camp told us about the frequent attacks by the Beit El settlers and the most daily Israeli military raids to the area.
Almost every day, Israeli forces raid the area and arrest youths and children, claiming they throw stones at the settlement. Clashes always take place here. Many were killed and others were wounded from the camp. We are always worried. Armed settlers have several times attacked the nearby Palestinian homes. And as you can see, they surrounded the settlement with this huge wall.
The issue is not about building homes for settlers here or there. They want to confiscate as much land as they can. This is our land. What was taken by force can only be restored by force. We have to face the Israeli plans and also on the international level.
The acceleration of settlement activities comes despite a United Nations Security Council resolution in December last year that denounced the Israeli settlement constructions as a flagrant violation of international law, and it prohibits Israel from building settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. Observers say Tel Aviv feels emboldened by US President Donald Trump, whom they expect won't impose any form of censure on Israel for settlement construction, while many Israeli officials predict the beginning of a new era with more aggressive policies against Palestinians.
In a few weeks, Israel has approved more settler units than it did in a whole year. It was unprecedented. Netanyahu considers that he's been given a green light to go ahead with more settlement projects. He knows that the Trump administration backs his right-wing cabinet. And Trump has even stated during the campaign that settlements are not an obstacle to the peace process.
The European Union has condemned the new Israeli plans, saying that building more settler units seriously undermines the prospects for a viable two-state solution. The Arab League has also denounced the Israeli move, calling it a sign of contempt for the international community and an obstacle to peace. Palestinians see the new wave of settlement approvals in the occupied territories as an act of defiance by Israel against international resolutions. They also maintain that the acceleration of settlement activities that was boosted after Donald Trump's presidency proves that Tel Aviv will never allow Palestinians to have an independent state on the occupied land. For the Sunrise, this is Monica Ndil, Occupied Ramallah.
To discuss Israeli settlement activity, we have two guests in the studio with us today. Salma Karmi Ayub is a human rights lawyer of Palestinian extraction who is a consultant for the Palestinian human rights organization Al-Haq. And Haim Rashid is an ex-Israeli who is now an anti-Zionist filmmaker and academic. Welcome, Haim and Salma. Salma, if I can start with you. Now that Donald Trump's president, there doesn't seem to be any constraints whatsoever on things like settlement expansion, do there?
I think it's an open question, actually, at this stage, because certainly he seems to have signalled that he's going to give Israel the green light, particularly through appointing an ambassador to Israel who is known to be very pro-settler and to have connections to the settler movement. And he, of course, he didn't condemn the initial Israeli announcements about settlement construction, But we're seeing a slight change in tone, I would suggest. I mean, it's not as harsh, if we can call it that, as the rhetoric of Obama, but he has condemned mildly the settlements more recently. And he said something about not actually having a settled policy yet on settlements, which is something he wants to discuss with Netanyahu when they meet next week.
He doesn't have a settled policy on anything, does he?
No.
Really?
So I think all I would say about Trump is certainly he seems to be far more lenient than say Obama was, at least in terms of his rhetoric. Yes. And the Israeli right is interpreting that as a green light to go ahead and build wherever they want to. Whether that will translate into reality as time goes on, I think is something which remains to be seen.
Okay. Now, I mean, as a human rights lawyer yourself, I'm not sure whether you've had any work with people affected by Israeli settlements, but these really do make Palestinians' lives a misery, don't they?
Yes, I think people talk about settlements as an abstract concept, and they don't probably have in mind the sort of effects it has on people on the ground. And the problem really with settlements is not only that they take up land, but they have associated with them a whole infrastructure of a permit regime, for example, checkpoints, closures, that affect every single aspect of Palestinian life on a daily basis and lead to an incredibly draconian and repressive system of control over Palestinian life. And that's the problem with the settlements.
And Haim, as an ex-Israeli, I mean, can you tell me a little bit about the mindset of an Israeli settler?
I'm not sure that I can get into the mind of an Israeli settler, or that I want to, but obviously these are people who are racist, who are supporting a form of apartheid in Israel and in Palestine, who want to get all the Palestinians out of Palestine. That is their aim, and they're going about it quite seriously. And that's why all we have seen in the last 50 years, and I suspect if the international community does nothing, we will see this in the next decades, that more and more Palestinians will be pushed out of their homes, of their lands, and of Palestine. And this is what they're trying to do.
And they are not kind of a fringe element, are they? Because they're right there inside the Israeli government apparatus in the cabinet itself.
Well, 51% of the Israeli Jews support ethnic cleansing. I wouldn't call that marginal. And that was done a few months ago. Now, probably, every time that they run a poll, it's a higher percentage.
Haim, there does seem to be some internal opposition to this law being passed. The Attorney General of Israel has said that he won't back it in the Supreme Court. I believe there's going to be some legal challenges. Is this law actually going to become a reality?
Well, we don't know. I think the Supreme Court has a very tarnished history of supporting the government on illegal moves. And therefore, it would not surprise me if they pass it by. If they stop it, it will come back again. It's just a move that Netanyahu has to push, because otherwise he will be taken over by the right, to his right, yeah? So in order to survive, he has to be more right-wing than the Jewish Home Party.
Briefly, do you agree with that, Sama? Is this law going to get passed? Is it going to...
I think actually there's a curious kind of situation with this law, which is that the Israeli Supreme Court might strike it down. It has a history of occasionally doing that. And I think really what the schism here is between the so-called, you wouldn't really call them the left, but the slightly left of kind of Jewish Home Party and the Jewish Home Party, is that what the Jewish Home Party is doing by wanting to pass a law like this is to actually formalize the situation of annexation that Israel has imposed in the West Bank. And actually have a consistency in a way between what is proclaimed to be the case and what's happening on the ground.
Okay.
Whereas those on the left of the Jewish Home Party, Netanyahu and to the left of him, would prefer to retain this sort of ambiguity where there's a de facto annexation on the ground, but that's not reflected in the law, and that's easier therefore to defend in the international arena. And I would suggest that that's really the difference between the two.
Okay, and we're going to pick this up in a few minutes' time. Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu has been visiting Prime Minister Theresa May in London this week, but as Ahmed Kabalo reports, Netanyahu was greeted by loud protests outside 10 Downing Street.
Angry protesters gathered outside Downing Street to to show their outrage over the arrival of Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu to London for talks with British Prime Minister Theresa May.
My father was murdered by fascists on the streets in the UK, and to invite fascists like this to the UK, I'm not going to stand here in silence. I will speak up for the Palestinians.
Israeli supporters and pro-Palestinian supporters both gathered outside to greet the controversial figure, but the pro-Palestinian presence was far greater in noise and numbers. For some protesters, the arrival of Netanyahu represented the dawn of a new alliance between May, Trump and Netanyahu, where the Israelis will have even greater freedom to do as they please with the full backing of the United States and the United Kingdom.
It's well known that Netanyahu is a war criminal and a child killer. His policies in the Middle East and specifically Palestine have been really detrimental to the people there. He bombs Gaza, he occupies the West Bank, and he's trying to take control over Jerusalem.
The UK backed a UN resolution opposing settlement expansion in occupied Palestinian land, and Netanyahu has defied that UN resolution and approved a massive new building programme of over 3,000 new Jewish settlements.
What's happening here is that Netanyahu is using what he sees as the opportunity of the Trump presidency to create what his spokesperson says is a new support network for Israel, which would involve a kind of Western alliance, even more accepting of the illegal settlements on the one hand, but also buying in, I think he hopes, into a new kind of coalition against Iran.
The new leaders in power in both Washington and Downing Street seem rather keen to impress their Israeli counterpart, and Netanyahu seems more than willing to take advantage of this and use this opportunity to accelerate settlement building and to exert more pressure on Palestine's long-term supporter Iran. Ahmed Cabello, The Sun Will Rise, London.
So Salma, picking up from that report, your thoughts on Netanyahu's visit to Theresa May?
Well, obviously it's disappointing, you know, that she's choosing to meet with somebody like Netanyahu, who is in charge of implementing policies that are so flagrantly in violation of international law. It's not surprising. I think in the post-Brexit landscape, the reality is that Theresa May is desperate to form connections with and trade relations with whichever nations that she can. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think that's going to erode any semblance of kind of a ethical human sort of foreign policy in favour of a pragmatic approach that just says, let's do trade with whoever we can. And the other thing that would have been going on, I think, is that she's trying to curry favour with the Americans, with Trump. And I think she thought that, you know, inviting Netanyahu and having this visit may help her in her relations with the new US administration as well.
What about the settlement activity? I mean, she did express some, I guess, mild criticism of Israeli settlement activity. What do you make of that?
Yes, she did. I think, you know, it's been UK foreign policy for decades that settlement activity is illegal and an obstacle to peace. And I think it's unlikely that she will actually renege, you know, from that position completely. You know, the question really is, has anything changed? Because what tends to happen is Britain makes these proclamations that settlement activity is unhelpful or illegal, but it, you know, relations with Israel carry on as usual. Yeah. So in some senses, nothing's really changed. I mean, the optics of it is bad that he's coming over and they're having this visit, but in a way, the reality of the relations between the two countries probably won't change that much.
Haim, do you agree with that? And especially Salma's point about in the kind of Brexit world, it's more likely that Britain will seek, you know, to get closer to traditional allies like Israel.
It's really difficult to see how they can get any closer. Israel is one of the major buyers and sellers of arms with Britain. Yeah. It both buys and sells arms from Britain. And we have to remember, it's 100 years to the Balfour Declaration. And in those 100 years, Britain has supported Israel. And without Britain, there would be no Israel today. So I don't think that we can see a big change coming, but I think that Britain will continue to support Israel as it has before. And you know, these noises...
But in terms of business size, it might be even a closer relationship.
Bigger, it would be bigger business,
Yeah. Was it heartening for you to see, I mean, in that report we just saw the pro-Palestinian demo was much larger than the pro-Zionist demo. Is that heartening to see?
Well, this is a sign that BDS in Britain is taking hold. I think this is a good sign. I wish it was even bigger, and I was ill, I wasn't able to join it. But I think on the ground, opposition to Israel is growing. We don't see any signs of it in government, and even in parliament it's very difficult to see it because the opposition has been very quiet the last 18 months.
Jeremy Corbyn doesn't talk about Palestine that much these days,
he was told not to mention Palestine, apparently. Yeah. It's very disappointing, to say the least.
Yeah, he's got his own troubles kind of keeping that the Labour Party together, I suppose.
Well, you know, Al Jazeera has told us how the Israeli lobby is working in London and how they are able to remove MPs or ministers if they wish. So it's not very surprising that he's quiet.
Haim, I mean, Britain would always say that, you know, it kind of plays a restraining role on Israel, and the Americans would probably say that as well. Do you think that's ever really been the case?
What restraining role? I don't understand this. I mean, you know, talking about illegal settlements is nonsense. All settlements are illegal. There are no legal settlements in the West Bank. There never have been. They're all illegal according to the Geneva Convention and the UN. So the idea that we're fighting illegal settlements, we are always fighting the whole settlement movement, and there is no slowdown. There's never been a slowdown apart from 3 months. There's never been a slowdown, and now it speeds up. So I can't see any restraint. I mean, if you think about Obama, he supported Israel more than any other American president. He supplied more arms and more money to Israel than any other American president. What is the restraints here?
Okay, all right, we're going to conclude this discussion in a few minutes' time, but we're going to move on for the time being. As usual, we've been compiling the latest news on Palestine that you probably didn't see on the mainstream media, so here's what we came up with. Palestinian officials have condemned an Israeli law that is meant to retroactively legalize thousands of West Bank settlement homes built illegally on private Palestinian land.
This is a war crime according to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. It is also an egregious violation of international law. It is a total destruction of any chances of peace and the two-state solution.
This decision confirms that Israel is continuing its colonial policies and deporting Palestinians from their own land. And it proves that it's still a country that operates outside international law, that does not care about international institutions. So it required the formulation of a Palestinian program of struggle to face the cancer of settlements to remove it.
Meanwhile, in a seeming distraction to facilitate other settlement building, Israel's authorities began demolishing buildings at a West Bank settlement on Monday, following an enforced evacuation last week. In 2014, Israel's Supreme Court ruled that a Mona was built on private Palestinian land and must be demolished. Settlers resisted the evacuation order and clashed with police, who were enforcing the legal ruling. And finally, the Israeli military has shelled sites belonging to the Hamas resistance movement in Gaza, claiming that it was in response to a rocket fired from Gaza towards the Negev desert. Local sources affirm that 3 injuries were reported in the shelling. The Israeli attack came shortly after Israeli media sources reported that a code red siren was heard in the Ashkelon region near the northern border of Gaza after being allegedly hit with a rocket. Haim, I must ask you about a snippet in that report about the Mona settlement being demolished. So on the one hand, they're expanding settlements, they're legalizing them. On the other hand, they're demolishing a settlement. What's going on there?
Demolishing part of a settlement. If the Supreme Court is to have any credibility, it has every few years to pass a judgment which is upholding the law, both Israeli law and international. Otherwise, it will lose any credibility.
Right.
So in 1950, they passed, they demanded the government to actually get out of Ikrit and Biram. And the government, until now, for 70 years, have denied that request, and they didn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So let's not put too much meaning on the decrees of the Supreme Court.
It's a PR exercise,
It's
basically.
a PR exercise, exactly for Netanyahu's visit in the UK.
To say that he's doing something about settlements.
To make it easier for Theresa May to meet with him.
All right, okay. Salma, let's get on to the Palestinians now. We've talked about the Israelis and what's wrong with this law and how it's oppressive, etc. What can the Palestinians do? We've heard Mahmoud Abbas say that he's going to take it to international institutions. We've heard Hamas say resistance is the way forward. We must continue the resistance struggle. What can Palestinians do?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. That's kind of the million-dollar question, because in a situation where there's such a discrepancy of power between the two sides, it's difficult to know what the Palestinians can do that will really be effective in terms of stopping Israel. I mean, certainly things like supporting the BDS movement, continuing the strategy of using international institutions, continuing any sort of resistance on the ground, that all needs to carry on. I think ultimately the situation has become so bad for Palestinians, and there has been such a shift to the right in Israel, as Haim mentioned before, that actually it's got to the point where the priority for Palestinians is to stay on their land and to survive. And anything they can do to help themselves in that situation, any assistance that can be given to them to help them just remain where they are and survive the onslaught that they are experiencing from Israel is probably is the best that they can hope for at this stage. And it's not to be massively
wait it out for better regional
but,
conditions, perhaps.
Well, I think, without some kind of change in the configuration of world powers regionally or internationally, without some sort of extra leverage on their side, it's difficult to know what they can really do. And as I said, I think it's, in a sense, it could be in a way a waiting game for the Palestinians. But what they need to do, what their priority is to stay on their land and to survive, because it really is a possibility that right-wing settlers would want to move towards some kind of ethnic cleansing scenario, or at least an increase in ethnic violence that will force Palestinians out of parts of or all of the West Bank.
And as a lawyer yourself, what do you think about the ICC? There is a bit of a noise that the ICC will look at this whole Israeli settlement project.
Yeah.
Realistic prospect or not?
I think I'm not entirely pessimistic, let's put it that way. And the reason is because, first of all, the ICC is under a lot of pressure to do something about Israel, or to do something about some kind of powerful nation that isn't in Africa. That's one thing. It needs to do that for its own legitimacy, for its own credibility. Secondly, the prosecutor in place in the ICC is not unsympathetic to the Palestinian cause. I mean, she's trying to be apolitical and trying to be fair, and she's taken an interest in the situation. And thirdly, this latest spate of announcements and this law that formally legalizes essentially land theft is another sort of prompt for the ICC to demonstrate that there is settlement activity happening now within their remit, something that they can investigate. It's not just something happening in the past that might be outside of their remit. It's something that's new. And so it probably will take a very long time, and it's very difficult to predict, but I'm not entirely pessimistic. That's the way I'd put it.
All right, Haim, I wanted to get you back in for the last word, but we're unfortunately out of time, so I can't. But thank you very much, Salma and Haim, for coming in today and sharing your expertise with us. That is all the time we have got for today. Once more, thank you to all our guests, and please don't forget to get busy on social media telling us what you think of the issues raised in this programme. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next time for more discussion and analysis on the Palestinian independence struggle. Bye-bye.